All right, here we go.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited for this episode though. This one will be fun. Lots of fun.
But boom. Um, can you just send me that link really quickly for the live stream?
Yeah. Oh gosh, why did it do this? Oh no, never mind. We're all good. I'm gonna send you that in the chat on Zoom.
Cool. I hope our audience has had a lovely week.
Mhm.
That this Aries season has been treating you well. I don't know, Mars in Cancer. What do you think about this like exalted sun with Mars in Cancer right
I'm not a fan, I don't think. No.
now? Yeah.
Um, yeah, I know just like it's happening in my like perfected sixth, and I feel like that's been a thing just since he went in.
Yeah.
But we're chilling. It's going all right.
Okay. Cool. I just sent out our link. Do you want me to send that on the marks too?
Sure.
Okay. Just kidding. I'm apparently not logged in and um
All right. I just tweeted that out. I'll just retweet it from the
cool.
Mercurians.
Thank you. Sorry to our audience. I wish that we could do this like before we go
It's
live,
it's all
but
right. Okay, sweet.
cool.
Edwin's here. Hey, Edwin.
Hey, welcome. Join the party.
All right. Yeah, do you have any other thoughts before we intro the episode?
I had a lot of crazy dreams this Virgo moon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've just been having a lot of dreams,
Hmm.
like a lot of them. Yeah, but that's about it, honestly.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Last night, or what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say I woke myself up talking in my sleep the other morning. Like I could hear myself talking
Oh,
out loud, and that was
that's
the
so
whole.
trippy.
Yeah.
I don't like when that happens. I'm like, oh, like consciously sleeping and aware that I hear myself making noise. And that's like, wait, did I just say that out
And
loud?
then you become aware of the fact that you're like sleeping, but like yeah, definitely a weird state of consciousness.
Yeah. Um, Last night we had a meeting of the Salem astrology group, which was really fun. We talked about like the lunar phase cycle, and like delineating the sort of 8 phases according to like Dane Rojar's kind of formation of that. And yeah, we just talked about like the natal phases, and then we went into progressions and like looked at how that secondary phase progression changes and ebbing and flowing and all that. So that was really fun.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm so glad that you're doing that. That sounds like tons of fun.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Last night was definitely a good night to do it too. Mercury just entered Taurus and like,
I will say we were having so many tech problems. We were like, okay, we get it, Hermes. Like, you're about to turn around now that you're in Taurus. Like, we were just having so many weird problems.
I definitely feel like Rahu is giving Mercury like a little bit of a difficult time
Mm,
because Mercury likes to be slow and steady and critical in Taurus. And Rahu's like, none of that is happening. Like, you need to pick it up, you need to move fast.
yeah.
So, yeah, but it was nice because Venus is there and like that trine to the moon was cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, Evan just said that he had his being drowned dream. Oh God.
Please. Being drowned, not even just like drowning. God, I'm sorry. That's terrible.
Yeah, that's
Very Mars
unfortunate.
and Cancer.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And Catherine's here. She says,
Hey,
hey.
Catherine.
Um, all right, sweet. Well, why don't we jump into it? So
Yeah, definitely. So
today, or what were you gonna say?
for today, we're starting with a couple different chapters, just kind of wrapping up this last section that Rhetorius had about like various different zodiacal configurations. And then we're going to go into lots, and like the last part of this episode is going to be super geared toward the lots, and that'll be like the primary focus.
Mhm. Yeah, so just a few like kind of quicker definitions about things, and then yeah, we're gonna go deep into like the Hermetic lots and also like topical lots relating to mother, father, children, siblings, all that stuff. And yeah, I think it's gonna be fun because I love lots. I love using them. Oh, Catherine, in quotes, just said it's Amani, but pretend you don't see my legal.
Oh my goodness. I'm catching your drift, Catherine. Hey, Catherine.
All right. Well, hey Amani, I'm glad to see you here.
Good to
But
see you.
yeah, so why don't we get started then? And I think it's your turn to begin.
Cool. All right. So we left off with fortified stars, right?
Hmm? Yeah, 42.
Okay. So 42. Oh, also, shout out to the AFA for
Mhm.
letting us read this book. Everybody check out the AFA website. This translation was done by James Herschel Holden. Amazing man, great author. Everybody check it out. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Mercuranians
Yeah,
if you want to see more of our content.
yeah. Your support means a lot and it helps us out because yeah, we're out here thriving and surviving.
Yes, yes, I am a college student. All right, so picking up on page 24, chapter 42, fortified stars. Each one of the stars is said to be fortified when it is in its own domicile or exaltation, or terms, or in proper phase, or well configured, or in one of the stronger houses of the chart. So it was a big, huge list, but basically, I think it's funny that we talked about Dorophori before this chapter came up, because I mean, like all of these things were kind of danced around with Doraphories, but now they're being like explicitly stated.
Yeah. So it's just stronger to help out a star if it has any of those things going for it, whether it's a zodiacal dignity or even just being in a good solar phase or in a good house. All of those things can help it out.
And note the difference between fortification and bonification, right? Just because it's fortified and it's strong doesn't mean that it's necessarily always good.
Hmm.
Did
Yeah,
you
that's a
know?
good point because you can have an angular malefic and it's fortified. But yeah, just a great distinction. So yeah, that's that. And 43 chariots. So the planets are in their own chariots or lampanes, like the Greek word, when they're found in their own domicile or exaltation or terms, and they rejoice in these places, even when they're found under the sunbeams. For the benefics increase their good, and the malefics are changed into a good influence. So it's almost like he's saying here that a planet's going to be in a chariot whenever it has its own dignity. Now he doesn't explicitly say triplicity here, which is interesting. Because sometimes they don't say all of the dignities, but you can assume it. But here I'm almost hesitant because he just says when they're in their domicile or exaltation or terms. And it's also because he kind of skips triplicity and it's often included in between exaltation and bounds or terms. So curious just about that.
I feel like I have seen an argument for Chariot by Triplicity and Deccan.
Oh, I personally do. I'm just saying, yeah, I definitely.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, he doesn't say that here.
Mhm,
So, you know, I don't know. Everything is a gradient, as we've said before. Like nothing's hard and fast, right?
mhm.
But
I will say though, like there's an element to Chariot that is somewhat problematic to me because I do feel like it's obviously a reinforcement. Like the planet's not like starving to death under the sun, but like they're still not effective in the way they are when they're not under the beams because they're still invisible. Like in my solar return this year, I have a very combust but supposedly chariot planet, and that planet is not like it did not go in the sense of that planet was totally protected at all. Um, they were very burnt up. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. I'm reminded whenever we talk about combustion and stuff like that. Like I live in the desert and some summers it gets to be like 125 degrees out for like a week straight. And like it is so hot. Like you can't be outside. The UV index hits like 9. Like you can't go outside. If you do, like you need sunscreen and an umbrella. Like it is so hot. Like you cannot move. It's exhausting. And so like Chariot is like, well, at least you have sunscreen and an umbrella, you know, but like
mm,
you're still stuck in the beams of the sun. And like the footnote here, I think it might be valuable to read.
mm,
Um, the Greek word lampane, covered chariot, designates a four-wheeled vehicle with a cover rather than the harma, war chariot, which was the usual two-wheeled war chariot. And so the covered chariot was reserved pretty much specifically for rulers, especially on more formal occasions. It's like a
mm,
limo now. But also in a limo, like you can't see who's in there. You can't
mhm.
see through those tinted windows.
Yeah.
So it's like an element of protection, but I I don't, it's not like some like extravagant thing unless I think we start to get into like the very like the higher dignities, right? Like if a
Yeah.
planet is exalted and in its own term and chariot, like then I don't know.
That's the thing. I mean, and not to just bring it back to my solar revolution, like that's so important and determines what is true about everything in astrology, but like the planet was in its sign and bound and the benefic of sect. So it was just like very alarming, at least in that sense, because I was like, that was such a lesson. I was like, yeah, no. And I think it's at least just like it's like, yes, obviously we prefer planets to have more dignity, but like if they're under the beams, they're not totally saved. Like just don't jump immediately to saying, oh, it's chariot, so there's no problems here. I think that's just naive with this,
Yeah,
at least.
definitely. Yeah. Hmm.
Maybe a few other things though. Benefics increase their good and malefics change into good influence. I don't know about increase their good if under the beams in chariot. Like maybe they'll be working harder, but
Right.
like the manifest effects might not feel as direct. But malefic's change to good, I think, is in some sense accurate because at least with Saturn, he's going to warm up a little bit. Mars, though, some people say, oh, well, he's going to get too hot, but other people say, like, well, Mars loves to be hot, but like that's what makes him untempered and crazy to begin with. So I think with Mars combustion, like, yeah, he might be comfortable, but that might lead to that excess that is a little too much. But then at the same time, we can also wonder about how malefic the sun always is. Like some authors say that the sun isn't like a malefic in terms of combustion when he's in Aries or Leo. When the sun's dignified, he doesn't combust things as malefically. So there's always nuance with this stuff, It's just like we have to really be paying attention to how we can modify.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point that I don't know if benefics increase their good, but the thing about chariot I that I always associate in my mind is that this planet is like under the wing of the sun. Like the sun is using this planet for its own purposes, right? Because you can't see it. It belongs to the sun in a way. And
Mm,
so, like, the good influence, I feel directly can be applied to solar principles, right?
mm,
The benefic, and so that also like the sun and Mars do have like multiple different kinds of affinity, right?
mm,
Um, but like the sun is able to make Mars like operate on in a solar manner, Whereas like when Saturn is chariot, like Saturn has to operate on behalf of the sun, but it's still Saturn, right? It's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't have that vivacious, lively essence to it, that
Sure.
Mars has. It just moderates that extreme.
Mhm.
Jupiter, chariot, I feel like is comparable to Mars, where there's that energized and like outgoing attitude to it, an
Mm.
affinity with the sun. Whereas like Venus or the moon, that has a totally different archetype.
Mm. Yeah.
Also, I just have a quick question. What is the orb for the planet in your revolution?
Mm, within 3 degrees.
Okay. Okay. Um, cool.
Yeah. So
40.
44.
Cool. When the stars rejoice.
Sorry, real quick. We have some messages. Milo Hularar said,
Hey.
Amani, I'm in a similar situation with that sturdy YouTube username. Wish I could change it. Hi, pals. It's Milo. Stuck to learn. Thanks for being here, Milo. Ocean Bacons said, been watching y'all since your first episode and so glad to catch you live. Love y'all's work. Cloud energy.
Oh, thank
Thank you.
you.
And Orphic Astrology is here. Said, bonsoir, les amis. Hello.
Yes.
Um,
Hello.
and yeah, sorry for the interruption, but hey, everyone.
Yeah, no worries. It's not an interruption. I'm so happy to say hi.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the support. All right. So 25, chapter 44, when the stars rejoice.
Mhm.
The stars Saturn and Jupiter and Mars are said to rejoice when they are matutine and configured, but the moon and Venus when they are vespertine. Sorry, let me say that again. But the moon and Venus when they are vespertine. Sometimes Saturn and Jupiter and Mars rejoice when they are configured in the quadrants from the ascendant to the midheaven and from the descendant to the IC. But the moon and Venus in his other quadrants, and Mercury with both sects through his being common. And that I'm going to pause here and let's talk about this. Let's talk about what we've touched on so far. So, first of all, what immediately jumped out to me when reading this is that Mars is said to rejoice as a morning star planet. Um, that's really fascinating. What
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess because he's a superior planet, like it's when he's starting his phase, so he is a morning riser. And also just thinking about the masculine qualities of Mars, like he's definitely, a morning riser in terms of, it's like, yeah, he's an evening planet, but remember, because he's malefic, it's like he's thrown with that group because that's where he's kind of tempered off. So that morning star is kind of like, he's more like Macho Mars ready to go, I think, in the morning.
Yeah, I agree. But exactly that. And like, you don't always want that though. Like you need Mars to take it down a notch
Right,
sometimes.
which again is like, well, maybe we might not want that. It's like around this language of rejoicing, it's more just like is qualified either way, it's like it's just going to do a different thing. Maybe he might rejoice personally being a morning star because he's like, "Oh, well, let me just go for it all." But like, maybe that's if he's the lord of the eighth house, a morning Aries Mars is like, yeah, that's going to be more problematic
Yeah, definitely.
potentially.
Yeah. And then sometimes Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars rejoice when they are configured in the quadrants from the ascendant to the midheaven, from the descendant to the IC. These are the culminating points, I guess, just both culminating and anti-culminating. They're the
Mhm.
masculine quadrants of the chart.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and then the moon and Venus,
Venus.
like in those quadrants that like can like move away from the upper or lower angle.
Yeah. Um, Little aside, I feel like that same principle can also be applied to the ascendant and descendant axis, but with like a different archetype, like the masculine, feminine, but like the quadrant leading from the IC to the ascendant is masculine. I don't know.
Right. It's just about like where do you want to define the culminating axis? Like, is it more about that it's going up and down, or is it that it's like going from rising to setting, because like either way there's a decrease and an increase within each quadrant, so it's like the traditional way sort of does emphasize that like it's masculine to rise up, to the MC, and to be all pulled all the way down.
You're right. Yeah, because
Well, but I don't know if that's right. I think that's what they
well,
it is, but it could be the ascendant too, in a way, if you think about it, like you said.
but then at the same time, that would make the quadrant going from the ascendant to the midheaven feminine.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I don't really think I agree with that. So I'm just kidding. I want to leave that one where it is.
Also, Michelle's here. Hey, Michelle. And said, as a morning star, Mars would rise before the sun, putting it above the horizon as a night chart. That's another really great point. So it'd be visible during dawn.
Yeah,
And that's a good point, that he would have the hemisphere rejoicing as well by that separation during sunrise.
yeah, thanks. That is a really great point. Mercury is changeable, right? Back to the book.
That's the one I'm like, though, because like, yes, he's mutable, we kind of switch him back and forth for everything, like, but like his waxing phase when he's growing in light is when he's evening rising and direct. So if we say that Venus and the moon are the same way, Mercury's an inferior planet. So he's in that direct early part of his cycle when he's rising in the evening in the West. So I don't know if like, I feel like he probably, I mean, Morningstar Mercury has its own powers, whether he's retrograde or just slowing back or speeding back up after being retrograde. But like, there's something about him being direct in his phase there that feels like, I don't know.
Right, because when Mercury stations direct as a morning star, it's still transiting back over that retrograde phase, and then there's like a couple days between that and like being under the beams, right?
Mhm.
If a couple days.
Yeah, it goes by pretty quickly. It's like a
Mhm.
small week or two or three.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Well,
But
after he stations direct, I mean, he's out of the beams for a little while after
but
stationing
transiting
direct.
over the pre-shadow or the retrograde grade degrees, right? And then but then the point is that Mercury transits back over its retrogradation period, and then
Oh, and then
shortly,
he's caught up to the beams.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know the exact, it's a small range though, but yeah.
yeah, it happens like pretty quickly. But yeah, it's so that's part of that. Like there's a very small window of time where Mercury isn't still worrying about what the retrograde stuff that happened and is not now under the beams, like and is still visible. Whereas
Mhm.
like with the evening star phase, like Mercury emerges and like has all of that power once it comes out from under the beams, becomes super visible. But yeah. Also though, we have to kind of ask like what you want Mercury to be doing, right?
Mhm.
Because like I firmly believe that whatever solar phase Mercury has determines whether it's morning, evening, more than the sign that it's in, right? Whether it's acting as a diurnal or nocturnal planet. I've heard others argue that like Mercury in a feminine sign makes Mercury a nocturnal planet. I would
Mhm.
say that solar phase is the determining point for that. And then you want Mercury to be in a sign that matches with the solar phase.
Yeah, I guess it's tough to rank them. I mean, Valens says you determine Mercury sect by his bound lord, and like his bound lord sect, he'll join that team. So it's I think they're all equally important things to consider. And if there's an aggregation of them towards one or the other, then you can kind of judge.
Yeah. And so do you think that you would want more continuity? Like you want it to line up, like evening star, evening sign,
Well,
right?
sure, if it's a night chart, then it'd be great to have Mercury in the sect, you know, but if otherwise, well, I mean, look, this is where it's like, well, what if he's ruling the 12th? It's like it's different
Right.
every time, but
Well,
I'd say generally it'd be nice to have Mercury in sect.
right. And I agree with that. I'm just saying to evaluate like Mercury's condition, like you
Yeah,
want Mercury to have the same sect things line up. Like you don't want
yeah,
it's more optimal to have Mercury as an evening rising in an evening sign.
right.
Okay. Okay.
Sometimes
Anyways,
we just have to talk the things out.
uh-huh. Little
But
aside.
I hear you. Yes,
Mhm.
I totally agree.
Um, all right. The diurnals rejoice by day when they're above the earth, nocturnals when they are under the earth. And again, nocturnals rejoice by night when they are above the earth, and diurnals when they are below the earth.
Yeah,
So you want your planets in their preferred hemisphere according to their sect.
yeah. So that was basically all the sect rejoicing stuff, which interesting it's kind of thrown to the end because in when sometimes like Dimitri introduces sect right up front, and it is like a fundamental thing, but I think maybe part of the reason it is introduced towards the end here is because it can have a pretty minute effect in a lot of ways, at least some of these things like hemisphere or quadrant. It's like I'm not always really looking at that to make, I consider it, I look at that, I like we said, like I tally that up, not always physically but mentally I know those things. And unless there's again crazy aggregation of them towards an extreme, like I've talked about that example of the girl who had all of the nocturnal planets and all the extremely masculinized sect rejoicings, like what that did to her testosterone levels going through the roof, the health problems, all that. We've talked about it, but anyway, yeah, just think it's interesting it's towards the end.
Yeah, I agree. It is really fascinating. But like at the same time, I don't know, there's some of this information here. I'm like, I wonder why this is so late. Like we'll get to it in a little bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, I like fortification. Why did fortification come after the discussion on sphere bearing? Because he didn't have an editor.
Yeah, I think we also just have to bear in mind that this shit could have been in any friggin' order. Like these papers were probably jumbled and passed and retranslated, and so it's probably have a pretty rough sketch of it, especially because there is continuity in like the versions from Antiochus and Porphyry that retain some of the good amount of the structure and the ordering of the chapters. But yeah, there's still some question as to just why some things are in the order they are. But yeah. Um, so Sunbeams,
Yeah.
chapter 45. Those which happen to be under the beams of the sun are said to be under the sunbeams, being ahead or behind. And this will be known from the calculation of the phases. And so, yeah, this is just where we have, without an explicit range, though, of where that phase begins, he says that just when they are under the beams, they're under the beams. So that's not very helpful, I guess, in terms of if there was supposed to be some more clear definition about that. He doesn't distinguish, he did distinguish the in the heart of the sun earlier on. We talked about the Kazemi or Encardia, but besides that, yeah, all we can infer is that he did give in 38 for bonding, 15 degrees for the moon. Maybe we're supposed to infer that, or if maybe at one point it was more explicit. I want to say in Porphyry and Antiochus it's written 15. I could be wrong, but yeah, that's
I do want to say though that because like every planet varies in brightness, right? Like they technically could have different ranges like under the beams, you
oh,
know?
they do. Yeah, that's a
But
good point.
right, whereas like some people don't pay attention to that at all. And I could be mistaken here. Take this with a grain of salt, what I'm about to say. But is different latitudes influence visibility and proximity to the sun? Because yeah, I think, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there could just be a whole, I mean, partially because if the ecliptic's going to be more oblique at a more northern latitude, like they'll be more horizontal. So like if there's a greater distance, it's still more like vertically the sunrise, the colors sort of all meet at like a, what do you call it? Like a circle, it's like at a level. So
Right.
it might be, yeah, probably harder to see some of the, Mercury, especially in a northern latitude. But
Hmm.
there's also so many atmospheric conditions with weather and pollution and things like that that could just make it and seasonal effects. So that's why I think they were just like 15 because
Right.
it actually varies a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely get that. I use 15 personally
Yeah.
for all the planets.
Yeah. I mean, Gemini Brett posted in like the traditional astrologers Facebook group the other day, like a picture of the sunset with like Mercury and Jupiter as evening stars, and how they were both pretty solidly under the beam zodiacally by degree, but when you actually go outside and look, like they were actually visible in the sky. And so he was just like, hey, little reminder, everyone, like you can use that range, but should we really be so interpretively jumping to say that, oh, it's within 15, the planets aren't visible, it's going to change their effects in the chart, when actually they might be visible? And so there is a great investigation, I think, that everyone should, as astrologers, like be involved with, like that, the real visible, like going out, looking at the planets, looking at the stars, like, and
Mhm.
especially also like using stellarium, like look at your chart, like if maybe you think you have something under the beams, maybe it was visible when you were actually born, you know? So
Right. But then at the same time, like I can never see evening Mercury because the mountains take up too much arc space. So do you know
well,
what I
you should
mean?
get on a
Like
skyscraper then, Stella.
right. Yeah. Like so I don't know. There's like two sides to that coin. Like I think that
I
there
know.
is strength and power in saying like this is the set degrees of the zodiac that fall into this like phase of being under the beams, but within this point it's combustion and this is
Yeah,
going to be different.
definitely not visible very
Yeah.
high. Which is,
Hmm.
and honestly, that's what I stick with. If it's 7 to 8 degrees out, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely hinging on visibility at all and very burnt. Um, but 15 is usually less problematic of a burning, but maybe like a feeling of being on the fringe of invisibility, you know, like trying to be obscured, whatever
Right.
topics it represents. And like he'll get, when we get on the lots, like he says, if the ruler of the lot of marriage is under the beams, they have a secret affair. Like the wedding is like done without being seen, you know. So like that invisibility by being near the sun, really, he doesn't say that explicitly in this chapter on Under the Beams, but that's the interpretive value.
Yeah, and like again, I'm kind of reminded of the analogy I used with Chariot with like the scorching summer heat. Like
Yeah.
you're under the beams, like you're just making a point to walk in the shade. You're just making a point to like walk in
Mm.
the shadow, but it's not like insufferable to be in the sun
Yeah.
or to
Yeah.
be outside in general.
Mm. Um,
I feel like I've read more than you. I don't have any problem reading 46, but if you want to read those two little paragraphs, I'll so
um,
be.
yeah, I'll read 46. Also, Connor's here. Hey, Connor. And Jolie's also here. Hello. Um,
Hello.
Jolie said, I can't see Mercury so easily in northern latitudes of the UK. So I hear you, Stella. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I know. Hermes is, that's his whole thing, though. You know, he's like, he's running so fast, we can't, it's hard to catch him for
Now
many reasons.
this is a bit of a tangent, but this is why I think that Mercury and Uranus do have like a significant affinity because
Oh,
they are
Uranus is
all,
like once a year.
yeah, they both are very clearly like psychopomps.
Mm.
So yeah, just a little aside because we're the Mercurianians.
Yeah. That's smart. The visibility, like erraticness of Uranus being like once a year at that opposition to the sun. Like I think there might be a handful of days it's visible. I'll say I actually haven't ever seen Uranus with my eyes. I've looked like the last few years and not seen it.
I tried, the last, yeah, a couple years ago, it was cloudy, couldn't see it.
Yeah, I had clouds last year.
And then this last year, it was eclipsed by that eclipse in Taurus, like the moon, like by declination too. The moon was up
Yeah, it was blocking
Uranus.
Uranus, right? That eclipse
Uh-huh.
with Uranus. Oh wow.
Yeah, Urana Marahu.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump back to the book because we're almost done with these initial things, and then we're like really getting into lots, which is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So 46. So this is on the times of life of the angles, the succeedance, and the cadence. Um, and so he says here, the ascendant shows the first age, the midheaven shows the middle age, the descendant shows the last age, and the IMC shows death and the honors or dishonors occurring after it. And again, the succeedant of the ascendant, so that's going to be the 12th, signifies the pains of the childbirth and the things happening to the mother when the native was in the womb. And I'm sorry, that's the second house, the succedent from the ascendant. The ascendant, then physically the act of birth and the times immediately after it. And then the cadent of the ascendant is the final times of the first age. So he's giving succedent as like what was happening before your birth. The ascendant is the birth, and then the 12th house, which is the place, rising, it was before the ascendant, but it's already visible up there, like the early stages of childhood years. That's also a little bit, I guess, not problematic, but other authors say that like the 12th house is what was rising before you were born. And so that can indicate that labor pains or problems with the pregnancy. So maybe there's a little bit of mixture between the 2nd and 12th that could be interpreted here.
Right. I mean, well, the pregnancy itself and labor, I think are like, it's a valuable distinction, right? Like the act of giving birth, because he says the things happening to the mother when the native was in the womb, the pain and like the pains of childbirth, yes, but if we're looking at the second house like as a longer period of time, like those 9 months that you were kicking around in there, right? Like, was that hard on your mother? Was it easy on your mother? But when it gets to the act of giving birth itself, like labor is happening with the planet that rises before the ascendant. Then again, like how many signs rise before the child is born? Like,
Could
I
be a
don't,
few hours for some births. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I think my mom was in labor for like 8 hours or something like that. And yeah, and she doesn't think that that's very much. Like some women are in labor for like 16. So
Yeah, I guess the other question here is like he's defining it as just going in the sequence of the signs. Like you take the angle as the primary. So he says ascendant is first age, midheaven, middle, end of life, death. And
mhm,
then he's going in the order by going succedent, which is 2,
mhm,
angle to cadent by going pre-event and then post-event. And like here,
right,
succedent of the MC, which is the 11, signifies first part of the middle age, the MC, the middle of the middle age, and the epineph or the cadent, the last parts of the middle age. But interpretively, like we would actually maybe try to think of it, and I'm actually trying to remember if Serapio, because he does a similar thing with the ages of the angles, and I wonder if like I can't remember. I think he might have said that like the cadent is the pre, the angle is the middle, and I'm sorry, the post ascension, the succedent is the later of the triad.
I don't I don't know. But I will say that these are angular triads, and this chapter is immediately followed by a section on the lots. And I don't know, I know we were just saying that like orders aren't super important, but that like sets the stage very well for zodiacal releasing, especially because what do we have right after this? The complete and lesser years of the stars.
Mm.
So it seems like we're kind of getting into that, I mean, or at least kind of laying foundations for that timing technique,
That's a good point. He talks about triads, lots, and then the years of the stars. And so he didn't expose that method in this compendium, that at least what's in here, he didn't, or it's not here, not maybe necessarily he didn't, but it's not in here. But like you said, that combination of sequence in those topics is conspicuous. Is that the right
Yeah. It's definitely, yeah, conspicuous.
um,
It seems intentional or purposeful, right?
yeah. But yeah, I guess so it's just a question of, do you want to just label the ages in the order and just make it easy? Or do you actually look at each triad individually and say, oh, well, that one was first, that one's second, and that one's third, in which case you would go like backwards and then jump to the next one, then go backwards and then like jump. So he's just going in the same direction. But part of me is like wanting to jump upstairs and grab my book and see if Serapio did it a different way, because I think he might have initially did
Um,
that before. But anyway, I'll just finish the second paragraph. So we did the MC triad, Then the succeedent of the descendant signifies first parts of the final age, the descendant, the middle part of the final age, and the cadent, the last parts of the final age. And then for the IMC, the time immediately before death, the succeedent, that's the fifth house. Then the IMC is death, and the cadent, or the third house, is the time after death. And actually, I was thinking about a few interesting things with Camus' chart that I might just mention really quickly here. If you guys don't know, we've been looking at Albert Camus' chart through this series and kind of grabbing some techniques that we've pulled from RHETORIUS and throwing them on his chart. And I'll just share my screen really quickly as we look at that, just to show something interesting in regarding this topic. Like, so he says, like, at least for the IMC angles, which are going to be the periods, you know, surrounding the death of the native, like the cadent or the third house shows what is like the legacy after death. And like he has Mercury there, you know, which is interesting because he was obviously known for being a writer. So that kind of phase after the death, the third house.
And like not just a writer, but like an absurdist. Like, you know, he wrote about like very just kind of what was very outlandish, like at the time, you know, very nihilistic but not depressing. You
Right.
know, like nothing matters, so have some fun, kind of a hedonistic element. So
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
good point. And I think it's interesting too that Jupiter would be in the fourth, which is the house of death. And he only died like 3 years after he won his Nobel laureate in literature. Like he was at the peak of his career right as he died. So I think it's interesting that Jupiter's down there because to me that maybe is saying something about how he was sort of at the peak and it was very like sudden the way that his death ended up happening.
Yeah, like the success that he attained, the greatest success came right towards the end of his life.
Yeah. But anyway, that was just some quick thoughts on that chart. We don't have to spend forever on this little timing idea, but those are interesting things to play around with in the chart because it's more of like a symbolic timing that's not like a specific time lord system or even like a periodic kind of activation or ascensional time. It's like it's kind of just built into the houses, which is a pretty cool way you can throw something out there. Like you see someone's, you know, their best placed planet is in like the 11th house, and you can say, oh well, like you're going to have a peak like in that early part of the middle phase of your life, and then it goes to a malefic in the 10th, and it's like, oh, the middle part of the middle life is going to have some difficulty, and that often plays out in pretty stark ways.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
Because like chances are the midheaven is going to direct to a conjunction with that malefic when that happens, you know.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
that kind of symbolism like comes out in more specific or acute timing techniques when you look
Right.
at it.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point that it is sort of tied into that primary motion, which underlies like, yeah, primary
yeah.
directions or even just general like solar arc directions, just moving things through
Hmm.
the wheel. But all right, so that's the times of life, and then that brings us to 47. So we're officially on the lots now. So do you want to take us away?
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
should we just say our thing about lots at first? Like we're kind of assuming just because it's a little technical to really explain what a lot is. So we're kind of hoping that most people, if you're here, are familiar with the calculation of a lot and what a lot kind of is. You know, if you don't, very quickly, like we're looking at a relationship between two planets in arc length, and then we take that equal amount in arc from another place in the chart, and that those three things in combo kind of weave together the story of a really unique or specific topic.
Right. A lot distance between A and B projected from C.
Mhm. It's very abstract and it sounds really crazy, but like they work so well.
Mhm.
It's insane, but
Yeah.
astrology is just
Well, and so okay, so let's talk
okay.
about
Well, then hold on. Should we put the book down? Because
yeah.
we actually have a discussion about
Uh-huh.
these lot related
Yeah.
things.
So
Okay, we'll just do
we're
this.
we're gonna pick up Rhetorius again.
Yeah.
But so the thing about lots is that like are you it's the idea that there is a significator and there's a significator and there's a third. And like how those three things interact by arc will fall into a place in your chart that has something to say about what belongs to those planets, to the but when it gets to like distance between a lot and a planet perfected from a point, that's where you can't say it's the archetype between two planets, but you get the point. Is like you're taking these two distinct energies, these two distinct archetypes, you're taking their distance, projecting it from a point to understand more about a specific topic.
Yeah, how
That
those two things
those,
relate to another thing in a way.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I guess some of the things we were just talking about in prepping for this episode was just like how the common convention is that based off of the sect of the chart, you'll travel a different direction between the two planets in question. And now what we were talking about is, and like I have to say, it's tricky because like I see it work out in practice all the time, like that those reversals work and interpretively like it works. But there's just this problematic element to how isn't the essence of the direction that we move from one planet to another what's symbolic about what it's extracting in the information that it's giving us.
Right. And there isn't continuity among that. It's not like every single lot that's out there. They say reverse it for day and night births. That there's lots that don't get switched at all. There's lots where the formula is supposed to change if you were born at night. And I I don't know. I don't know.
Lots
Like
are just there's a lot there's a lot of like just undefined things, like, and even like some of them are sort of gender based, like when there's these marriage lots or friendship lots that are designed for a woman or a man based off of that it's an assumption of like attraction to the opposite sex. Like there's a lot of those things about lots that feel constricting in the same way that the sect argument or sect component of lot calculation is a part of it. And that's where I think we feel like and are in an early stage maybe of trying to just make the discussion beginning about like reformulating lots in a significant way.
I agree. Crucify me for this.
Yeah, I know.
But I think that medieval Islamic astrologers did with the lots what modern astrologers have done with minor bodies and sun signs. Like there was almost like this scramble to like talk about it. Like there are so many lots. You're telling me that Venus and Mercury from the ascendant has to do with cucumbers and melons. Be so serious right now. Like,
And so, but this brings up the question of, okay, well, if our premise with astrology is that if we have something we want to investigate and we have something we want to try to discover that could be replicated astrologically by some technique, is it the act of the investigation that will create an astrological outcome that can reflect it? And therefore, if we just choose to make our lots different, like if we say, you know what, we're not going to do sect reversals anymore, we're just going to take into account A and B, like the father lot, should just be sun towards Saturn in every chart. And that Saturn to sun is a different topic. It's a different signification. So if we just say and choose this, just like you can choose to make Mercury, Venus the lot of melons and cucumbers, then like, why shouldn't we be able to maybe organize, synthesize, restructure, and reformulize it in a little more consistent and coherent way, without necessarily getting rid of like those commodity lots? Maybe we need to make new ones for like like maybe like stock, like the stock market is a great example of the
AI
equivalent
lot.
version of these hundreds of lots of commodities that they're casting at the annual ingress of the sun into Aries. It's like there's ways that this is like we're just at the beginning now of figuring out what these lots are really all about, because there's just so much going on.
Right. And like I think that I think that this is a part of the tradition that I encourage people to think independently
Yeah.
for, especially when you're deviating from just like fortune and spirit. Like, I'm not telling you to start reversing your calculations for fortune and spirit, like, well, I think that fortune should be moon to sun by day. But take the source texts with a grain of salt. Like, explore your astrological autonomy. Um, but at the same time, there's lots that like it shouldn't work and it does. However, this begs the question of like, how are these planets rooted to the nativity? And what does that have to say about how clearly and strikingly these lots are factoring into the situation?
Mm.
So, anybody listening in the comments, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Um, what spicy takes you have on the lots, or any lots that you have that do resonate really well or don't resonate really well that you don't know why.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I know another thing we were talking about is like, so first of all, we talked about that, right, that there's a binary, and when we move in one direction, it should archetypally be different than another direction. Just like with the timing technique, that paradosis of the handing off of a planet to another, it implies a sequence in a chain, and that the directionality is crucial to the interpretation. So like in math, that same analogy is like commutation. So like, is 3 times 4 equal to 4 times 3, or is 2 plus 1 equal to 1 plus 2? And there's some versions of like this a realm of math called like abstract algebra, which studies mathematical objects of sets, or objects like mathematical groups that don't behave like that are non-commutative, where 1 plus 2 isn't equal to 2 plus 1. And I think planetary pairs are non-commutative, because especially in the realm of lots or timing techniques, that they mean different things. There's a different flow.
Right, I agree. It's like addition is commutative, but subtraction is not. You know,
Mm,
like taking 3 minus 2 is not the same as taking 2 minus 3. And I think that same attitude is what's coming with the planets. So, yeah, definitely I agree. There's some kind of archetypal value to that lack of reciprocity. There
mm,
it allows for more nuance, right?
mm.
So, yeah, I think that refining and making the lots more acute would be a really, really cool thing that comes of our astrological era.
Yeah, I think there are 42 two-planet lots that exist,
Mhm.
and that's it. I mean, you can then project them from different places, or you can pick projector like degrees in the zodiac as triggers, which like we have examples of, like we'll show a lot that's like calculated from a zodiacal degree. So there's lots of different ways, but like ultimately there are 42 two-planet lots, like Sun to Venus, Venus to Mercury, Mercury Moon, Moon Saturn. There's 42 of those pairs. And so I think somehow the fact that those haven't been systemized or organized or grouped like that, the fact that hasn't happened yet, I think will happen. And also like cleaning up lot formulae just in general, because it can be kind of confusing for some people to read that like common way that it's written as like the thing plus something minus another thing. I'm a more fan of like the arrow, like something to something from that.
Mhm.
Uh, but again, these are kind of smaller points just about what you'll see or read about lots online or in a book.
Well, and so um A plus B minus C, right? That formula
Mm.
versus
C to B from A is really
yeah,
what that is saying.
yeah, exactly. Um So, but like at the same time, they fall in the same place, but is there interpretive value to that distinction in the ordering of this question, right? Should it be A plus B minus C, or should it be B to C from A?
Yeah. And, I guess maybe the argument for this sect reversal is that, well, at night, then the archetypes reverse. But like, we don't interpret your sun. Well, maybe we do in a way interpret the sun as, no, but not entirely. I was going to say, maybe why don't we interpret the sun as the moon in a night chart? And in a way we do in terms of like life force but like they're both relevant and whatever, but like we don't give the moon automatically rank and honor and kingship and royalty and wealth. It's like those things don't switch in a night chart. So why should the order flip and it still give the same signification? And like, hey, again, I've done it and used it and it kind of works like that. But it feels like there's just still so much, I don't know, things that can just be cleaned up
Yeah.
or organized. Because there's, again, like you'll see Sun Saturn as like 7 or 8 different kind of lots. And, several of them, I've seen apply, like grandfather and father are often that lot both, and they can usually both have a say in that somehow. But even like Mercury moon, like that's like friends, but it's also slaves, and that's also like knowledge of correctness and religion and rumors. It's like there's lots of those pairs have a lot of different lot names and uses in their pairs, but it's just very abstract
Yeah.
to try to extrapolate all the different meanings.
And I mean, like, I also I went through like a phase like a little while ago, not like a while ago, when I was first starting to use lots. I took a very like non-traditional approach. Like I was like, all right, so I'm gonna take the distance between the Lord of your seventh and your Venus, and I'm gonna project that from the ascendant to understand more about topics of marriage. And it worked, like
I think that might
there's
be a lot.
oh, is it?
I know Venus to the 7th cusp is like
Well,
happiness and harmony in relationships.
yeah,
Maybe it's just a
weddings or
happiness.
something. But well, there's that, but to the degree of the seventh
Yeah,
house.
yeah,
But um, but that was a little bit different. I took the Lord of the seventh.
yeah. Well, that's
Yeah,
crafty.
thanks.
And
But
that's the other thing too. It's like so many of them are just these crafty ways we just come up with.
right, and like why would that not be acceptable? Like, why wouldn't that be okay just because it's not a part of the written tradition? I
Mhm,
do not advocate for that attitude for everything,
mhm.
But yeah, especially with something as disorganized as lots are and their meanings. But I
Yeah.
think that the basic question that you have to ask yourself is who is the archetypal significator of this topic that I'm trying to discuss? Or who I just lost my train of thought, but go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say like extending it like what is the archetypal realm? And then like that's the first planet you start from. And then like to what extent does that get modified or then interact with like a secondary factor? And then you take that arc length and then what area of life does that affect?
Right.
Like so most of the lots are all projected from the ascendant because it's like what is the specific topic, in relation to you and your life. But some lots are projected from like the eighth house or like from another planet. And so it's like maybe it's like the wealth of the king, and it's like they do like a Saturn Jupiter from the sun, or it's like they do the, you know, maybe the rank of someone, and it's like the sun to Jupiter from the midheaven. It's like
Right.
you can do that projecting point based off of where maybe it's being directly affected by, and the
Yeah,
describe the nature of what it is.
exactly. Theophilus made some of his own lots. He's a war
Mm,
astrologer. And one of them is basically the lot of fortune. It's the distance between the sun and the moon, but it's projected from the midheaven. It's not
mhm,
projected from the ascendant.
mm,
And that's the lot of royalty.
mm.
And that makes like perfect sense to me and hopefully everybody in the audience, like that's you would project that from the midheaven and not from the self. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Honestly, like make your own lots, play around with them. You'll
Yeah.
probably discover some interesting things if you do. Like I've played around with a lot of like the really crazy ones. Like one of my favorites is like the part of water journeys, which is like, okay, it's the distance from Saturn to 15 Cancer and then projected from the ascendant. But like I've gone back through my old photos, looked at like every time that I was like going on a boat and like had the chart from like when I was loading onto the boat. And that part of water journeys was always like getting aspected by the ruler or like exactly conjunct like the planet that rules it, or like just so many interesting things. It's like the most crazy things you would think are so bizarre. It's like because someone wrote it down, it exists archetypally to manifest that thing. And it's like it only did that because someone wrote it down. So it's like, right, if you write your own and you gel with your own symbolism, it's like your own lots will work, you know,
Right, exactly. And I mean, this is,
if
I
they're
have,
like, you
oh,
know, they need to make astrological sense, at
right,
least. That was my only
right.
caveat to that.
Yeah. I mean, like, take a degree of autonomy in your approach, like, don't feel obligated to go like strictly by the book, but make sure that you have a reasoning and can explain why you are choosing the planets, using the points that you are, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, this I have likened the use of lots to the use of minor bodies and outer planets as well, where it's almost like you throw a handful of grains of rice and see what pictures you can pick out of them, right? Like, it's that same idea, is that there's so many of them, there is so much variation that you really need to see how they're relevant to the chart in the context of a specific nativity. And I would also argue that lots are not necessary. They're important, but they are not crucial,
Mhm.
as 19th century astrology proved.
Yeah, I mean, I do love lots because I think they'll add a layer similar to the 12 parts where it's like there are hidden things happening specified to your chart that exist more uniquely because of, you know, the exact time you were born. And at least the 12 parts can just refine, placements in the sky, but the lots can refine all those distances between planets, for your ascendant, which will be different, for everyone based off of when they were born, even in the same day. So it gives that specificity, which Jolie just said here. I think the thing I like about the lots is the most is how it is so personalized because we're casting from such a personal point for the native. And that's a great point because that is really the superpower of lots, is that we can hone in on a really specific thing archetypally from two planets or 2 points or whatever, and see exactly how that directly affects you. And that's why like talking about someone with the lot of the mother and its ruler like really shows how
Mhm.
you experience your connection to, whatever that topic or lot that you're like endeavoring to explore in someone's chart is, in a way that your fourth house or 10th house might not just cover completely. And so I think one of the things we wanted to like really show when we look at Camus' chart is like, when we talk about his children, like, we look at the fifth, we look at the ruler of the fifth and planets in the fifth, but also like the lot of the children and the ruler of the lot of children. Like this is two other places that are going to really refine and describe how that story plays out for someone.
Right. And I mean, I don't mean to come off as if I am admonishing the lots or arguing that they are unimportant. I think that they have a lot of value and a purpose, right? They're here for a reason. They're an integral part of the tradition. But I will not let that keep me from highlighting their flaws and their downfalls.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Milo also said, so I've seen results doing wild things with lots like the Lord of Hidden Knowledge technique,
Mm.
um, excuse me, which can end up with the ruler of a random lot taking on a bunch of specific meaning. Right. So it's just by chance, that's the whole idea, casting like lots here. Yeah, one planet ends up being the ruler for a specific topic that otherwise is just not indicated through the house rulerships.
Mm.
Maddie says hi. Hi, Maddie. That's my sister.
Maddie.
And Milo went on. But I think the most important stuff comes from the conversation that happens in the consultation space. And that's so crucial. That's a really beautiful point because ultimately, again, if the technique, if your astrological technique is sound enough, you'll do a good job throwing any of these things into place, when you're just talking with someone.
Right.
And ultimately, I mean, they wrote one more thing, because we're comparing planets for strength when making the final call. So even if all things point to a debilitated planet, there's still incentive to work with the most resourced planet in the end.
Like the Almutin of pregnancy. right? Like it's not always just the ruler of the sign, it's
Oh
the
yeah,
one that's
I
most
hear.
suited to facilitate this topic, and lots can add another layer to that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I know. I'd love to do an episode on compound almutens in terms of like the masterful way you could really go through to deliver a delineation for all of the 12 houses by doing what we just said, which is like planets in the house, ruler of the house cusp, the lot, the ruler of the lot. And it's like you kind of go through and add all those up and you get a planet or two that can really highlight how that topic ends up going. Um,
Mhm.
and Milo said the egregore of lots. And that's a great point because in just like modern, I guess, magical theory, maybe the concept actually goes back further than that. But I know at least I've read about this term, the egregore, that's defined as like a consciousness entity that exists solely because there's been a growing number of humans that have given it meaning, and that it has a sort of supernatural ability to replicate that meaning simply because we created it and enough people and more people keep perpetuating the signification of that thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, definitely. And like that I feel like you were kind of saying this when we were talking about the lot of cucumber and melons, but in a totally different way, right? Like that's a really good word. Thank you for that, Milo. Um,
Mm,
yeah, just the idea that it's the lot of cucumber and melons because a lot of people grow cucumbers and melons here, and it's a form of livelihood.
mm,
So yeah,
yeah.
cool. Well, on that note, was there anything more that you wanted to say to preface what we're about to read?
Yeah, so I guess just like now that we've talked about, all right, maybe in the future things will be reformed or changed up or whatever, but like if we are looking in the tradition, which the lots that they give, they work, but we were just griping about whatever. They work. They do work well. And so when we're getting into the books, it's like there's really several different kinds of lots that we'll explore. So there's topical lots, which relate to specific people, things in your life. The hermetic lots or the planetary lots, which are like fundamental. They're often cast first before all of the other lots. There are helegical lots, which relate to the native's life force, health, and length of life. There are eminence lots, which are based off of how eminent or famous a person can become. There are timing-based lots, which are calculated specifically in to use by perfection or directions to time when that topic comes to life in the person's chart. Like there's a timing of children, timing of marriage lot. Um, there's also mundane or like these commodity lots that we talked about, which are like cast at the annual ingress that show, things about the weather, things about the economy, things about the, war or the ruler of the kingdom, like those kind of mundane lots, and also horary lots. So more specific things like I know there's a rumor lot that is often used in horary that you can like see if there's like, is the correct information being discussed here. And so there's lots more specific to question astrology or horary astrology. So lots of different kinds of lots.
There's lots of lots, and lots of them have lots of lots.
I feel like the gods really played a joke by like just this whole equation of like having so many lots, and that like that's kind of the problem is like there's just lots.
Of lots.
This sounds so dumb, but I just feel like that it was not that didn't happen for no reason. Anyway,
Well, and that I do wonder if that is part of the part of the value of calling them parts. Wow. I just went to say like the value of calling them parts, but I had part in the sentence. Semantic
part of
drain.
the value of calling them parts
Parts.
instead of lots, because there's lots of lots, we'll call them parts because that's part of the value of calling them
Calling them
parts.
parts. Oh my God.
I really don't know if I love parts, to be
Neither.
honest. But lot is yes, it has the semantic value of like, casting lots, but I don't know. I think we should read. I
I
think
agree.
you're reading 47 here.
Yeah. Alrighty. So back to RHETORIUS, page 26 now. Chapter 47, Signification of the Lots. The lot of the moon, or of fortune, signifies all those things in the body of men, and the actions and praises arising from his way of life, and the sickness of the mind and companionships. The lot of the sun or of the daemon signifies the things of the mind and of character and rulership and worth and glory and religion. The lot of the ascendant or of the basis was established as an accessory cause of life and breath. For the basis itself is giving of breath from the ascendant, and it signifies bodily things and dwelling abroad. So just a little reminder, basis is, isn't it the shortest distance between fortune and spirit projected from the ascendant?
And
Um,
below the horizon.
yeah, it'll always be below the horizon. If it's above the horizon, something happened with your math.
Um, yeah, I guess like we're just getting the first fundamental lots here. So we get three, the moon's lot, the sun's lot, and then basis, which is sort of like they're blending. And I know Bonatti talks about how like these lots are cast first above all else. Like he says like even the astrologers will calculate the positions of the sun and moon, and then they'll do fortune and spirit, and then they'll do the rest of the planets. Like the sun and moon are the cosmocrators, is like the word the Greeks use. Like we have chronocrators which like rule periods of time, but the sun and moon rule the cosmos. They're the universal lords of all, and so like they get each one archetypal lot that is, they sort of indicate everything. Like so many things come under their domain, and they're so powerful in revealing these actions of the native in terms of their life, their work, their body, their character, their temperament. And yeah, they both just have an immense power in delivering a lot of information that otherwise is not in the planets or the angles.
Yeah, I agree. I think that fortune and spirit is super crucial, like super, super crucial. And basis as well, of course, right? Um, yeah, I mean, the luminaries are the lights, right? I mean, we did a whole episode on them, but they are definitely the most important planets.
Yeah, and like it's interesting how like with fortune, we're getting the lunar lot where we go the distance from the sun to the moon in a day chart. And that tells us about what ends up manifesting physically, the circumstances that are out of our control, the things that befall and happen to us, accidental things in a way. And then that inverse of the lot of daemon or spirit is like how our consciousness inserts itself into our reality, and how we take management or control of those circumstances around us and use our mind or our intelligence to create.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that also parallels some of the principles of the sun and the moon, right? The sun is the light that you emit, right? It's your what was the specific word?
Also, I just realized I need my computer charger, so I will be
Okay.
right back.
Yeah, I'll
You
keep
can
talking.
keep going. Talk about
Yeah. So the sun and the moon they're just like they're royalty. What was I saying about the sun? Oh, and the sun is your disposition, it's your spirit, it's your will, your ego. But the moon is the one who collects the last of the planetary energies before distributing the fortune as spirit comes down through the celestial spheres. And that parallels like so clearly with the moon's law. Um, I'm going to continue reading. So, paragraph 2, the lot of Saturn or of the retribution, also known as Nemesis, was established over the daemons of the underworld and all things hidden, and display the manliness and fight and destruction and misfortune and the kind of death. Just a quick aside, the lot of Nemesis or retribution is Saturn to fortune and reversed at night. Jupiter or victory, faith and good hope and assembly and fellowship, also treachery and success. Victory is spirit to Jupiter by day and reversed by night. The lot of Mars or of boldness is indicative of rashness and treachery and strength and every sort of villainy. This is Mars to fortune by day, reversed by night. Lot of Venus or love signifies the desires and lusts and loves made in the same sense that it is indicative of gratification. That is spirit to Venus or Valens is it fortune to spirit that Valens gives? I don't know why I can't remember. Doesn't he give the same
Yeah, in a
formula
day
for
chart, the
formulation?
lot of love is from fortune to spirit.
Okay, right. Um, the lot of Mercury or necessity signifies anguish, wars, hatred, and judicial sentences, and all other violent actions happening to men.
Mhm.
So, Mercury, just once again, is Mercury to fortune. So, a couple interesting things about this. One, the positive lots that are given all involve spirit and not fortune, um, and a benefic. The except unless you're using Valence's formula for love. But the ones that are more negative have to do with malefics.
Mhm.
And it's the malefic to fortune. Or well, but then Mercury with necessity. Like, what do you think about that? With about necessity being so negative?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts. The first thing I'll say is the what often people call nemesis, I really think we should call retribution. Same thing with Eros, calling them love, because it's just like sort of like lucky or common stance that like we have those words in English, but nemesis, I'd say definitely, especially doesn't really signify what nemesis, like the Greek word means. Like, Ramnuja, she was the goddess of like divine retribution. That's really what this lot is about. Not nemesis is like necessarily an arch enemy, because even here he talks about like the daemons of the underworld and like all things that are hidden. Like I think personally the lot of retribution or nemesis, Saturn's lot, is probably the closest thing that exists in traditional astrology that maybe is akin to like the more modern evolutionary astrological interpretation of like the south node or the north node, where it's like there's a lot of like spiritual effects that are associated with a lot of retribution that can reveal like what your own personal like unconscious self can, how that could be revealed in your chart, or where you have an unconscious blockage with something, or where you interact with spirits or events of the underworld, or like there's a really, I'd say, spiritual side to retribution, which is really powerful to observe. But also death, destruction, misfortune are also things associated with it too. um,
Punishment,
yeah.
consequence.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now the retribution getting associated with boldness or courage, Mars's lot, and necessity, Mercury's lot, to me, it actually makes a lot of sense. And this is something that I sort of discovered when I was writing the guidebook that I made on the poster that I made, where if you look at the preferred domiciles of the planets, and if you look at the solar and lunar hemispheres of the planets, so the solar hemisphere on the zodiac would be from Leo to Capricorn, and then the lunar hemisphere is from Aquarius to Cancer. If you look at which planets rejoice in the solar hemisphere, those are going to be the active signs. And on that half of the wheel, the other active signs are, after Leo, Libra and Sagittarius, and they're ruled by Venus and Jupiter. If you look in the lunar hemisphere, which signs are ruled by planets that sympathize with the lunar hemisphere? So those are going to be the other feminine signs in that half, which are Pisces and Taurus, also ruled by Venus and Jupiter. Mercury, Saturn, and Mars, their domiciles are anti-rejoicing to the solar and lunar hemisphere. So Gemini in the lunar hemisphere, Aries and Aquarius, all active signs in the lunar hemisphere, and then Capricorn, Scorpio, and Virgo, all antithetical to the solar hemisphere. So it's the very deliberate way that the Venus and Jupiter are harmonious. They're natural. They sympathize with the solar and lunar hemispheres. But Mercury actually ends up getting grouped with Saturn and Mars in the way that he's antithetical to the way that the sun and moon divide things. And I don't want to underemphasize those solar and lunar bounds, because like, I mean, Paul even said the sun and moon don't have bounds like Egyptian bounds, because they have their hemispheres. Like they rule the halves, right? He said like they're the cosmocrators. They're so important. So I think that all ties into why Mercury is grouped with the fortune lot here.
I I agree. I think that that's a really valuable point, and it does provide some insight in why it's such a negative, like, understanding or attitude towards the lot. But I honestly, like, would have and still do expect kind of something different, like, everything is related to the planet's inherent archetype and inherent the things that belong to that planet's sphere. Every single formula is explicitly linked to that. The
Hmm.
only the only part that of this list that Mercury has is judicial sentences, and that even kind of belongs more to Jupiter, right? Judicial topics. So, I don't know. I don't disagree with it. It just kind of makes me raise an eyebrow.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't disagree with it. I think maybe our question here is why these seven lots? Because this is what we were talking about when we were preparing is like, what about the lot of Venus to Fortune or Mercury to Spirit or Mars to Spirit? And why not look at those 14 lots or maybe, 10 without the Sun and Moon to Fortune and Spirit, but there are some lots for those. Um, and in that case, there are some in the tradition, like the Jupiter Fortune lot is the lot of success, and Venus Fortune is the lot of worldliness, which is interesting. And Mercury Spirit is like cunningness or cleverness, but also trickery and deceit.
Right. But then at the same time, like with this, it's like, why is it Mercury to Fortune by day and Fortune to Mercury by night instead of Mercury to Spirit by night? Like that makes more sense to me, make it Mercury to Spirit by night.
And yeah, that's again where we're just going to have multiplied out the versions of, oh, what we end up getting here. I mean, to me, it feels more like, Mercury to Fortune feels like the mercurial things falling onto physical constraints, which is like legal things, it's like litigation, like contract, like all these like binding necessitate, like doing your taxes, that's very like a necessity kind of thing. Whereas like a Fortune Mercury thing, it's like happenstance coming to mercurial things. So like maybe that direction could actually show something more about like when necessity gets grouped in with things about like letters and writing, like if you do see those stray delineations, like maybe that's showing up archetypally because in some of these charts, it's Fortune Mercury is the direction. And that in those instances, maybe that's a little bit more emphasized on the mercurial resulting thing as opposed to the more fortune thing that results as like a cause or like a necessitative binding Mercury thing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
again, it's just like there's lots of things to think about why, you know, Saturn has some positive, or retribution has some positive, but also negative things. Victory has some positive, but also treachery, some negative things too. Maybe that's more of the, um,
Well,
maybe Spirit to Jupiter, like overconfidence or something, like you get too blown up in your ego.
yeah. Um, I don't remember what I was gonna say. I had a but it's evaded me. Did you want to pick up with 48?
Um, yeah, the only other thing I think I wanted to say was when you brought up the Valens lots, because Valens doesn't introduce all these hermetic or planetary lots. He introduces fortune, spirit, and basis, but he introduces love and necessity actually as the distance between fortune and spirit. So he basically says going from fortune to spirit is actually like love, and that going spirit to fortune is like necessity. It's like again that the physical things that inspire action or harmony in you, in your spirit, in your mind, in your your consciousness, versus like your consciousness having to deal with the physical things, and that's like the necessity. And so they'll each be projected out from the ascendant, and then whichever one lands below the horizon is also the lot of basis. So basis will be love or necessity, whichever one's below. um And yeah, Jolie said, or Jared said, for fortune, going from the light of spirit to the dark of matter. And that, yeah, essentially it's moving from the sect light to the counter sect light, in that sense of going from whatever the illuminated one is to the non-illuminated, and for spirit going from darkness of matter to the light of spirit. So from the out of sect luminary to the sect light. Yes, we didn't define that specifically, so thank you for that addition. And Jolie said, I like how the Islamic astrologers call it the lot of burden or heaviness, i.e. limited by gravity. And just realized I'm talking about Saturn's lot and not Mercury. Yeah, I mean, that's a really great term, I think, for it as well, because there's a lot of things that like retribution couldn't encompass, like that heaviness or like the gravitas of the harder things in life, or the seriousness. Like I know Bonatti, he also talks about retribution, like intense or like devoted, focused study to something. Like it's almost like a I think he talks about like a skill and precision of like your knowledge or your dedication to something. And like same thing with victory, where it's like it's aid and help and support from people around you, but it's also like, building temples and, generosity but generally benevolence, it's like their planetary archetype, and the range of those things can sort of manifest under these lots as well. And Jolie said hollow victories. I think that was about when we were talking about the spirit Jupiter maybe versus Jupiter, the spirit thing.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, should we do 48? All right. So this is our last chapter. It's a little long. And here is where he starts to just delineate. And really, it's like these aren't necessarily guidelines to replicate each one if you ever see it in a chart. I think this is mostly valuable, and we were talking about this too, Stel, like that it's the essence of how he's delineating a lot that's the most valuable thing to take away from this excerpt here.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I keep yawning like so hard. I don't know why I can't stop. But absolutely, yes, I totally agree. Just a couple quick comments about some of the lots that are going to come up in this chapter. Injuries is the insect malefic to the out of sect malefic. The lot of children can be Jupiter to Saturn, or Jupiter to Mercury for boys, Jupiter to Venus for girls. I feel like there was another one. Oh, lot of marriage.
Oh yeah.
Was Saturn to Venus, or Venus to the seventh house. I don't agree with Venus and Mars for women only. I think it should be one for all of them.
Yeah, I think Venus Mars also has been an adultery lot, which I've seen work before.
Yeah,
So Venus Jupiter though can be adult like affairs, but Venus Jupiter is also just like super pleasure, like where you can get yourself in trouble from the extreme beneficence.
right. And another one that I did really like for marriage was the sun to the moon from Venus. I like that a lot. Like, I like the idea of casting fortune from different planets to understand more about the topics that that planet signifies.
Yeah.
I think you can do that. Yeah, I think you can project fortune from like anywhere and learn a lot about it.
Yeah. One thing we didn't talk about too, but like fortune and spirit, like they're so powerful. Like Valens, for instance, called like your natal ascendant, like the cosmic ascendant, and he called a lot of fortune the natal ascendant. Like it's so uniquely personal because, like Jolie said, we're specifying it to the degree of your ascendant, the distance between the sun and moon. So it's so vital and so powerful as a helegical place, holding your vital life force and your energy, that they become ubiquitous. They become relevant and powerful in every case, except maybe, and that's another thing with these lots, is like when you have weird luminary stuff happening, whether that's a new or full moon, a lunar or solar eclipse, a luminary conjunct a node, a luminary just generally poorly situated, maybe aspected by malefics and in a dark house. These lots, especially fortune and spirit, sort of seem to get a little funky. especially because their timing algorithms seem to significantly break down. So that's also just another thing with these lots that's maybe important to think about how we're understanding that whole algorithm of when they turn on and switch off, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when the luminaries are, when the moon is bound to the sun, like that has significance, right? And like what's going on with these luminaries and how their archetype will manifest in a more acute way for the native.
Mhm.
And if you there's charts where from the natal ascendant, from the horizon, it's like a moderate chart, like of celebrities, but then from fortune, it's like you've got this domicile planet 10th from fortune with three other great lots like victory, courage, and spirit 10th from fortune,
Yeah.
and then you start to see like really, because it's fortune is what the native does with its lot, right?
Mhm. With your
Yeah.
allotment. Yeah. I
Hmm.
also think fortune houses slowly manifest over time too. I've
Mm.
definitely seen that play out with my parents and lots of other people's charts. Just when I've read older people's charts, like often their house rulerships, like they sort of grew into like their fortune lord's ascendant. Sorry, their fortune lord's house placement relative to the lot of fortune as like describing their helmsman, like where they're headed, as opposed to like their ascendant ruler, which is like what they were doing when they were younger. So I think the fortune houses can manifest over time. But I always look at them and layer them regardless. I think in a nocturnal nativity, the fortune houses are extra powerful and they have to be looked at. Rob Hand looks at the spirit houses as like perfect, idealistic, like platonic forms. Like there are no malefics, there's no detriment, there's no fall. Like relative to the houses of spirit, like you see the perfect essence of the soul's divine plan of like what you're supposed to learn and understand and be illumined with in the world, which I think is a really interesting take on the derived houses from spirit too.
Yeah, yeah, that is very fascinating.
Mhm. And I was gonna say,
Oh,
oh, one thing, like with those new and full moons, like what happens then is because there's no distance between the sun and moon, that lot doesn't have to get projected very far from the ascendant. So like as the sun and moon over 2 weeks move to oppose each other, like the transiting lot and lot of fortune and spirit, so to say, are like kind of together at the ascendant on the new moon, and then they slowly move apart. And then at the first quarter at 90 degrees, they'll both be kind of opposite in the fourth and 10th. And then at the full moon, they'll conjoin on the descendant, and then they'll move backwards as the moon wanes back to the next new moon. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about too, how they operate cosmically like that.
I agree. That one took me a little bit to conceptualize. So if you're not catching the drift, just throw it in like Astro Gold or something and like click forward because it'll make a lot more sense. Um, but there was something that I had to say and I keep forgetting it. It keeps leaving, coming back, leaving. It's the same thought. And I'm like, yes, I remembered it. And then I lose it.
Is it about fortune?
It's about the lots. Oh, yes, yes. Okay. So, there's also different like approaches that you can take to seeing how much influence the native themselves has over their fate, their fortune, the ability to steer themselves in one way or another. And I do think that spirit and fortune interactions can provide insight into that, as
Mm,
well as the clarity that someone has as they are navigating through their fortune that they were given, right? Because if you have spirit in a dark house from fortune, right? Like there's this almost like blindsidedness to it, right? And I mean, of course, it's not that cut and dry. Where's fortune in the chart? Where's the ruler? Can the ruler see fortune of the malefics? Whatever.
mm,
But you get the point. And like, particularly interesting with like Antisha, because and like contra Antisha, because there is a commanding element to it. Like they're not just aspects, right? If it's a aspect from the right, then of course that might indicate that one is more powerful than the other, right? So I don't know, just some interesting things that I have observed as well is this idea of like fate and how you can try and navigate or steer your fate and what you use to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know we were gonna maybe read from this. Do you think it's a good time now to read some of the things about delineating a lot before RHETORIUS tells us his specificities?
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, well, I was just gonna say in Chris Brennan's text on Hellenistic astrology, in chapter 15, when he goes on to the lots, I'm sorry, 16. He gives just like a very, very simple cut and dry list of like best case scenario for a lot to like manifest its effects and like positively contribute to the nativity versus this is 518 versus like all of the worst scenario cases for a lot. So we investigate the lot, we calculate where it lands, and there's 13 things that he lists to look at. So all of the good criteria. Do you want me to read the good and you read the bad?
Sure.
I
I'm just fucking with you.
Okay. So best case scenario, all of this would be applying. Lots in a good place, benefics co-present, benefics configured to it, aspecting it, malefics in aversion to the lot. The Lord of the lot is a benefic planet, and the Lord is well placed by sign, and the Lord's in a good place, a good house, and the Lord is configured to that lot and aspecting it, and the Lord itself is configured to the benefics, and the Lord itself is in aversion to the malefics. And the Lord is being bona fide by great aspects from benefics. The Lord is also not being maltreated by a bad aspect to malefic. And the Lord is not under the beams.
So,
Ideal scenario.
right.
Never happened.
Impossible. Physically impossible.
I mean, maybe not, but like,
I mean, the chances of having both the Lord of a lot and the lot itself being both averse to the malefics and configured to the benefics,
yeah, it's rare. It's rare, but
yeah, super, super rare. But a bad organization of lots. Thanks, Chris, for this nifty little list, by the way. But bad, the lot is in a bad house, bad place. Malefics are co-present with it. Malefics are configured to the lot. Benefics are in aversion. The lord of the lot is a malefic. The lord is poorly placed by sign. The lord is in a bad house. The lord is not configured to the lots, or the lord is configured to malefics, and the lord is not being bona fide. The lord is also being maltreated, or the lord is under the beams. So basically, the idea, I mean, I feel like this really emphasizes this kind of reciprocal relationship between a house that a planet rules and the house the planet is in, and just all of those aspects, because it has to be favorably aspected to both the lot and the ruler. That was like the most stuttering, almost incoherent sentence, but I think everybody caught my drift.
yeah, you just want it. I think the most important thing, honestly, from that list is that the Lord can witness the lot.
I
Because
agree.
remember, these lots are like very ephemeral. They're like kind of just floating in the sky. They need something to really physically trigger their activation by like an aspect, which means maybe if it can see its ruler, that means that lot as this additional place of indicating a topic is going to somehow be able to produce manifestations or produce indications that relate to whatever the configuration is. So if the lot of the father is ruled by Saturn and Saturn witnesses it by square from a dark house, then like that is going to open up a way to talk about a difficult relationship with the father figure in the chart. But if the lot of the mother is like ruled by an exalted Venus and they're in a trine, it's like that makes it come to life. If like the lot of siblings, isn't aspected by the ruler and the lord of the third house is like cadent, that's how you add up that testimony to say, it doesn't look like it's getting really triggered here. So I'm not really going to look at putting a lot of weight there. That aspect to the ruler is like what allows it to manifest, like especially in timing techniques, when a planet partners with its lord, that is the time in life in that sub period when they're partners that it comes to life. And I think it's the same idea with a lot witnessing its lord.
Yeah.
Um,
I
Jared.
also I
Oh,
also will add,
mhm.
if the Lord can't witness the lot, look to the triplicity rulers, the exaltation Lord, you know,
Right.
like Lord broadly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the bound Lord of the lot. If neither the domicile or exaltation Lord can witness the bound Lord, there you go.
Mhm.
You've got some help.
Yeah, or the decant. I mean, yeah, I definitely was talking generally because all those things can
Um,
totally change it up. Jared said, I have spirit averse to fortune, but they share a ruler, which is mitigating. So I think that was in regards to what you were saying about them, yeah, witnessing.
yeah.
And Catherine said, what's the orb for aspects to lots? 3 degrees, question mark. That sounds about right to me. I would maybe go wider for fortune and spirit, because again, the other thing that like we'll have to remember is like a 3 degree orb. Like if I see that, like that lot's definitely getting turned on, even if it's not the ruler. If that planet's aspecting it within 3 degrees, that's telling a huge story about that lot. Because ultimately, what he's going to start talking about in the next chapter here is just like even general some whole sign configurations with lots. Like generally, the things don't necessarily need to even be in an exact orb, like applying close orb aspect. Just the fact that like the malefics are, for instance, in the signs of squares to that lot is enough to show that that's getting really impeded and facing a lot of difficulty. So the orb will make it really loud, but like generally, all of the whole sign configurations to lots are valid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All whole sign configurations are super important. I also look at antitia, contra antitia to lots. Is those partile has to be partile unless it's the ruler that of the lot, then maybe I'd give it like a 2 degree or maybe three, you know. Um, but yeah, I partile aspects are like ding 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 ding
Yeah,
ding.
for a lot, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, okay, were there any other things with lots? Like now we've
There's
really done
there's
the
a
gamut.
couple comments I have as we get through here just on the
Yeah.
formulas of certain lots, just for
Mhm.
clarity. Um, but I'm gonna wait until we get further in
Okay.
because nobody will remember.
Okay. So chapter 48, the signification of these lots. Excuse me. The sun aspecting the lot of Daemon makes childless persons.
Okay, let's just pause on this one.
That one is just really bizarre
I
because that's probably easily the majority of the population, and also like archetypally why. But like maybe the Greek was corrupt here. It's just a little bizarre, if we're understanding that correctly. Um,
yeah, a little as an understatement.
yeah.
Like what?
But anyway, the rest all have
Doesn't make
pretty solid.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the sun disposing the lot of injuries makes injuries to the heart. So injuries in Leo, heart problems, that can go to all the maleficia for all the signs, especially for that lot. But also a lot of fortune, spirit, maleficia come on everywhere. Um, Jupiter beholding the lot of Daemon makes individuals to be instructed by the gods and in their dreams. And he will have all the divine favors, even by square or opposition. The ruler of the lot of fortune being under the sunbeams makes those dying violently according to the nature of the signs of the fortune. But if it escapes the sunbeams a little bit, so if it moves, a little bit further out, those dying violently are no longer produced, but rather vagabonds and those who are sentenced many times. But if the benefics are an aspect, no longer will he be dying violently, but he'll have moderate luck. And the ruler of the lot of fortune and daimon, being under the beams, makes those dying violently according to the nature of the sign, not good and not particularly evil, but always honorable when angular. So there's some interesting things there. Jupiter just aspecting the spirit somehow gives instruction from the gods. That makes sense if you're getting an aspect from the greater benefic to the point of our consciousness and our mind. The dream thing is interesting too.
Yeah, and like I was gonna say like today, like maybe it's not like divine inquiry from the gods, but like it's the idea that like you're an intuitive person. You
Yeah,
can
you're
pick up
maybe a
on
little more tapped
things.
into messages or
Yeah, you
synchronicities,
have
things.
dreams about people and then you get a text from them later that week and you're like, "What?" Like, yeah. but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily like a priest.
Mhm. Yeah, and so having the Lord of Fortune under the beams is really unfortunate. And whatever sign whatever sign fortune is falling in will be like the cause of how that deadly or critical health effect is causing the critical period. And if it's just a little bit out of the beams, you can kind of get by in life, but you'll still struggle a little bit. If the benefics are aspecting, they'll help out even more. But the rulers of diamond and fortune under the beams, it's not good, not super evil, but if they're angular, then like you'll still be honorable. I
I
haven't
think
really looked at
that's
that particular statement, but
well, I think that's a really interesting one because like sometimes there's car accidents that like make the news and for whatever reason, like suddenly there's a GoFundMe, people are helping, or like with like police brutality and stuff like that. Like there's tons of people who are subject to police brutality but never receive that honor, that respect from the people. And so I don't know, I feel like this comes up especially with news, you
mm,
know where certain stories make it to the news and others don't.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. Um, do you want to read the next one?
Yeah. I'm gonna read the next two.
Yeah.
If the lot of children falls in a domicile of Saturn and a malefic aspects the lot, it destroys the firstborn. And if the lot of children falls in either domicile of Mars and a malefic aspects the lot, it destroys the middleborn. But if the lot of children falls in either of the domiciles of Mercury and a malefic is an aspect, it destroys the youngest born. So interestingly, just because you're seeing that like the hierarchy of malefics, right? The greater malefic is Saturn, so it's the older sun, the greater sun, I guess. Mars is the middleborn, and so it's the lesser malefic, and then Mercury, who's just accidentally malefic and happens to and rules young people.
Mhm.
Then but if the lot of Damon falls in Capricorn, it makes the native forbearing and changeable. But if in Aries, Leo, or Scorpio, irascible and stubborn. The sun aspecting the lot of fortune and having its ruler under its beams makes exiled persons. If the ruler of the lot of the father is found opposite to its own domicile, where the lot of father happened to be, this native is said to be supposititious. The ruler of the lot of fortune being in fortune and aspecting the lot says that this aspect is bad, especially if it is also the sunbeam or is aspected by malefics. Yeah, so you don't want the ruler of fortune to be a malefic, and you definitely don't want a malefic ruler of fortune combust or under the beams.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I don't have tons to say about those two.
Yeah, we'll keep going.
Forward.
So if the moon happens to be in conjunction with the marriage lot and Venus aspects the marriage lot by opposition or square, it gives marriage with a relative or with the native's own sisters. If the ruler of the lot of marriage is found setting, he says this marriage will be accomplished secretly. So setting under the beams, that is. And if Saturn is found to be the ruler of the marriage lot and Saturn is in the descending house, the female native is seduced by an old man. So if Saturn rules your marriages and he's in the seventh, it's really an indication that you could maybe be partnering up with someone of a significantly older age. If the Lord of lot of marriage is setting, the husband is quite undistinguished, and this marriage will be made secretly. So again, the marriage lord being under the beams, I think there was one author that just said the ruler of any lot being under the beams makes that topic like kind of wither and
Yeah.
like kind of not come to prominence or importance. So similar thing here, but also the specific delineation of like, well, it becomes like secret or unhidden or hidden. He says also look at the phases of the stars, that they're not exalted or depressed, and consequently saying the destructive things if they're high or low in their luck. So if Jupiter is found ruler of the marriage lot and is setting, this will be accomplished from the members of the family, and they will be rich or famous. If Venus is found marriage lot lord or lady, she is found in the descending angle. It signifies that this will be accomplished through deceit and jest. So if like Jupiter's ruling your marriage law and is setting, like you're gonna have help from the families, like it's gonna be like very smooth. But then if Venus is in the same role, then it's deceitful. Maybe it's more lustful. Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I think that's can be valid. I mean, I think having a lot of marriage just ruled by Venus is going to make someone desire maybe that marriage in a stronger way, because like the other ones, like if you have your marriage lot ruled by Jupiter, it's like the marriage is supposed to produce reputation, honor, but if it's a marriage ruled by Venus, it's like it's more about the intimate connection, which could be potentially more lustful. So I think that might be what he's getting at here. But deceit and jest, I mean, I don't know, maybe jealousy is like the undercurrent of that. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't know. I feel like there's a little bit of misogyny coming through
Mm,
this part, like Jupiter being the masculine planet, and it's like honor, repute, like good marriage. And then it gets to Venus and it's like born from lust and can have deceit. So I don't know. It's a lot easier for Venus to be afflicted than it is for Jupiter, though, because Venus is more frequently under the beams and retrograde, and those two things, and not rejoicing by hemisphere. Those two things, those three things alone are enough to kind of make Venus more apt to acting in a malefic way.
mm,
But yeah, I don't disagree with it. I do see the point here, right? But
yeah. I know I totally hear you, and that sentiment is definitely present here, but that unfortunately will just stem further back to the way that Venus and Jupiter are canonically defined in the tradition in terms of those gender binaries that are reductive.
yeah, yeah.
So now if Mars is an aspect, assuming probably to the lot itself, this was done for the sake of an attack resulting from a dispute. Yeah, maybe vengeance. I mean, then again, like marriages in the ancient world, like it's a very different time than nowadays. So, there were more kind of organized or planned ways things happened, and there could have been more spite, involved between families that were, I'm not an expert on that, but like I know it's just very different from how those things happen nowadays. So again,
Well,
grain of salt with these marriage delineations.
yeah, marriage was a business transaction,
Mhm.
frankly. There were oftentimes like literal exchanges made of like crop and gold and stuff like that, like for a daughter, you know? So yeah, it was very much business and not about love, about like securing wealth and stability for your child, which I do agree with, like, in the context of the old days, but today I do feel like, yeah, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you don't come from a family or culture that practices arranged marriages.
Yeah. All right, almost there. If the lot of marriage happens to be where Venus is, with Mercury ascending or being in an angular in a masculine sign, it prognosticates pederasts. So, you know, people who try to have sexual relations with children, or it was pederasty rather just male homosexual relations with children.
I think that that was specifically referred to for male. Let me look
Yeah,
that
I
up.
think it's the latter. Um,
Yeah,
but the other
it's
questionable thing here is he isn't necessarily saying that's a
that.
negative thing. He's
Okay.
just saying it makes the pederasts, um, especially when he does have other terms to describe lecherous, or what are the other words that he uses? Here it's just like he's describing the condition, because again, like that was actually like a common practice. That was like a very not institutionalized, but societally like ingrained part of life in the ancient world, was men that sort of took on a younger male to apprentice and kind of maintain that mentorship, but also sexual relationship with. And he gives a delineation for how that might happen.
Yeah, a homosexual was, if you were a homosexual in ancient Greece, it meant that you had sex with a man and you have facial hair and he has facial hair. You guys are both grown men. Nobody here is a boy, right?
Mm.
That's kind of where that like distinction lies. And same thing with like women. There's hardly any speak at all of female homosexuality in ancient Greece, especially. But it was the idea that like it was a male dominated world, right? So sex was was kind of contingent on power dynamics.
Mm. Yeah, I think also in the ancient world, like a lot of the emphasis, especially for men in homosexual intercourse, was like who was actually participating in the receiving end. And it
Right.
wasn't so much valued as if you were doing it with another man, but it was more of like, do you give or receive in that act? And that was like more what the topic of that discussion like was actually centered on, which
Yeah.
anyway,
Anyway.
so but also if Mercury aspects a lot of marriage, it will make the same thing, which is what he just said about pederast. So there's that. And if Mercury happens to be in a masculine sign aspecting it, it will make relations with males. But if Mercury is found in a feminine sign aspecting a lot of marriage, he will have unnatural relations with women. So again, just like look at your lot of marriage, right? It's like what kinds of planets are aspecting it, like who rules it? You know, that planet's going to talk about sort of what the nature of your desire for union is in terms of like a longer term stable partnership with someone. And planets aspecting that will describe the way that you experience and encounter that journey of finding that for yourself. The houses relative to that lot could actually reveal a lot about what your marriage life looks like together. You know, how your joint finances are, like the second house from the marriage lot can reveal a lot. So things to just think about, moving out of the scope of the restriction of the book. Just like look at, you know, does Mercury remove the binary? You know, if you have Mercury aspecting your lot of marriage, you know, do you identify as someone on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum? Like things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, just restructure some of these things for modern understanding.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So there's only two more short paragraphs for today.
Take them away.
Thanks. If you, oh, by the way, the lot of brothers is Jupiter to Mercury. If you find the ruler of the lot of brothers in the ascendant, say that this one is the only child. If the ruler of the lot of brothers falls in a bicorporeal sign, say that this one will have other brothers, also from another husband or from another mother. By which I mean, for example, if the lot and its ruler fall in a feminine sign, say the brother is from another mother, but if in a masculine sign, from another father. If the lot,
Also, sorry, just real before you do the next one, I think also like I know Saturn Jupiter was also a brother lot that was used often in the Hellenistic period. So I don't know which one he's referring to here, but
you're right. Yeah, that could be either one. But yeah. Um, and then the last paragraph. If the lot of fortune falls in a masculine sign, it destroys the father first, but if in a feminine sign, according to Dorotheus.
hmm.
I read that so poorly, but in a feminine sign, the mother, according to Dorotheus. If Saturn casts a ray on the lot of the father, which is like oftentimes Sun Saturn, or by aspect or by transit, first beholds the lot of the father, it destroys the father first. But if similarly it beholds the lot of the mother, it destroys the mother first. Which is Venus to the moon. If a malefic beholds the lot of the father or the mother, it says that that one will be destroyed first. So just looking to the length of the life of the parents, which is a very important part of ancient society, knowing how long your parents will live. I mean, it's important to us too,
Yeah.
but that was a very,
Very important part of the ancient world. We don't give a fuck about how old.
I'm just saying,
No,
like,
no, totally kidding.
I've never had somebody book with me and be like, can you tell me when my mom and dad are gonna die?
No, I
You
know.
know? Like, yeah, but that came up.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. I mean, just think about how you wouldn't not find that in like a modern text on astrology, but like that was in several ancient authors, is like which of the natives' parents dies first. And Valens talks a lot about how you figure that out. He has chapters on that and chapters on timing that. Um,
And yeah, like when that's gonna happen, because also like that is a ton of responsibility for the native. They lose support. They're mourning. Like that's heartbreaking, you know?
mhm.
But yeah, it's definitely a trying period for most people.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right.
Well, Camus,
Oh yeah, Camus.
or what else do we want to say? I know we're like really pushing the 2 hour
Oh,
limit here
I
now,
can't
so
believe that we spent 2 hours on 5 chapters.
yeah, that's all right. Um, and yeah, do you have any other thoughts on these chapters? Okay, so we're gonna get into showing some of these lots in Albert Camus' chart. All right. Um, is there one you want to talk about first, or is there anything? So I have some notes just on his chart and other things, and also things we haven't talked about yet that we might throw in. So I don't know if you want to start anywhere, but
Feel free to open up this discussion.
okay. Well, I guess the first thing I'm interested in looking at is his lot of victory. So this is the distance between Jupiter and the lot of Spirit. And you can see they're right next to each other. And so in a night chart, it's Jupiter to Spirit. And so we go backwards in the direction of the zodiac. And that's going to land right up here at 19 Virgo. And so his lot of victory is in a domicile of Mercury. Right. So that's saying something kind of right off the bat, just about the nature of what his success or rank or aid in the world might pertain to. But the victory is also very much impeded by a square to Saturn. And Saturn's the lord of his sixth house and the lord of his moon. And his health was a continual struggle throughout his whole life that debilitated his success in pursuing certain avenues that like he kind of continuously faced a block because his tuberculosis kind of was repeatedly coming back in multiple phases throughout his life. Which again, L6, out of sect, Gemini, Saturn, lungs, to right, just chronic, right? This really powerful theme that's showing up there. And in a whole sign opposition to his ascendant lord. So those are just some of those notes. Any thoughts on that or anything else you're seeing now?
I mean, I have other lots that I can
Yeah,
talk about.
yeah,
Like,
go ahead.
oh, okay. I mean, I I wrote this. Oh, no, I didn't. I didn't write it down on pen and paper. I put it in my notes. Um, oh, well, his lot of marriage falls into Taurus in the eighth house,
Mm,
which I thought was really interesting. It's at 20 degrees of Taurus. So, Venus is the ruler and she is domicile, so he did have two wives, and they are in like zone, so that adversity is mitigated. But it's still in the eighth house. His first wife was, or in the eighth whole sign house, I mean
mm,
quadrant. His first wife was addicted to morphine, started using it for menstrual cramps, became super addicted, had an affair on him, had an affair with his doctor, and Camus divorced her like very, very quickly and with his father's support. And then his second wife, he had like affair after affair after affair with her.
mm.
And she was foreign. She wasn't from the same place that he was from. I forget, the it evades me. But that
From
also
Spain, I
is,
think.
huh?
She was from Spain, I think.
Oh, that does sound right. Yeah. Um
Or wait, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of his mother. No, I think she was from France. I know they met in They met in France. They didn't meet in
Oh,
Algeria. I know they married in Algeria, but I think she was from France. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
right. There was okay, something foreign happened with her.
Yeah.
I when I read the biography, I know I thought that I thought that she was from um somewhere else, but I guess not. So yeah, well, he cheated on her like over and over and over again.
Mm.
And when she found out, she became like super depressed, also abused substances. Yeah, was not the most favorable thing. So you can see that even though he did have marriages, he had two of them, especially with a double-bodied sign and Mercury's lot falling right next to the descendant. You can see that both the law of marriage and necessity kind of speak to these challenges and frustrations that he's had, burdens almost that he's had in regards to his topics of marriage.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that necessity falls on the descendant there because he felt so constricted by his marriage to Francine, that like that was almost like his subconscious like frustration that drove him to more affairs was because he said straight up, he said he was someone who didn't believe in marriage. And it's interesting because, first of all, like the Lord of the Lot not witnessing, that's just like an immediate indication of like some trouble or unusual circumstances showing up there. And then necessity on the descendant, like that binding necessitative cause he had to his wife because they were married, his second wife,
Mhm.
was never gone away. And like that was what frustrated him. And that was still what drove him to affair after affair, was that like he felt so stuck and constricted in that relationship, because then she ended up having children. So let me talk about the lot of children now.
I do want to add just one other thing on the topic of relationships.
Yeah.
His lot of love falls in Sagittarius, like
Oh
they're
yeah.
with Mercury. Both the seventh house cusp and this Eros are in double-bodied signs, which indicates like two or
Mhm.
multiples, right? And the ruler of that lot in Sagittarius is exiled or
Mhm.
fallen. Sorry, my
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
Um,
Fallen in aversion, and like, love is in the 12th place from the ruler.
yeah.
So it's like when you think about that in a few ways, like being exiled like from your partner, and eventually when she found out about his affairs, like she became extremely depressive, and like she really struggled with her mental health, that like she underwent electroshock therapy, which eventually was just really bad for her, and she attempted suicide. She attempted jumping out a window, but he actually saved her just in time, and she ended up forgiving him. But it was, yeah, definitely a really problematic experience between, yeah, just their marriage and his affairs. But yeah, so they did have two children together. They had twins. So the lot of children is, yeah, the Jupiter to Saturn. And so we see that distance between them here. And if we jump that back from the ascendant, so Saturn to Jupiter in a night chart, the ascendant to right here, it's around 21 Aries, which is in an almost partile aspect to its Lord. So, and its bound Lord. So it's falling in the bound of Mars and Aries. It aspects that Mars exactly. So again, we were talking about that, just, okay, like, yes, like that's a good testimony for children. Again, the Lord of the fifth house is in a double-bodied sign, and the sign of the twins, literally. So that's interesting. He did have twin children. And Jupiter is in the fifth whole sign house, which also is Jupiter's a general significator for children.
Yeah.
So again, that's how you could kind of layer this thinking of like children definitely are showing up. Um, Now, what was interesting too is he actually had children the year that the ascendant profected to Aries. So Mars became the annual lord, and Mars is the lord of the lot of children, and also the exaltation lord of Capricorn. So he does participate in the rulership of both the fifth whole sign house and the lot of children, which I think is relevant.
Yeah.
Um,
I also think it's really fascinating. His lot of foundation falls in Aquarius in like right next to his moon.
yeah, it's like 25, I think.
Yeah. And I just think that's really interesting because his health issues were something that came up for him time and time and time and time and time again, like all different ages of life. From when he was a child doing sports, he had to stop competing in competitions because it was taking a toll on his health, throughout college, throughout when he got older, when he became an adult. He would have gone into the war, but he was denied. Like he willingly would have gone and fought, but he was denied because of his health.
Yeah.
And that was just a foundational, like, key component of his life.
Hmm. Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's right near his moon, which is Lord of the 11th, and it's like also like the basis of his life was he was actually he spent so much time like with other people and in groups. Like he was a director for like plays that he wrote, and like he would star in them, but like he joined like a social or like a communist militia and or a group, and like he got like ousted out of it, like that Cancer Mars right on the 11th cusp there. And like I feel like the foundation of his life was sort of always surrounding somehow those lunar themes that connect to how he was participating and then subsequently getting into like trouble with the communities he was a part of. But also like, this exiled Mercury in the third house, he was, and opposite his Gemini Saturn, he was actually publishing an underground, like, French resistance newspaper against the Nazi occupation of France called Combat. And it was really interesting how it's like this third house Mercury, like spreading out, the knowledge and the information to the people about like the oppressive governments, and the invasion from the foreigners, from the Germans, and also like his plays that he put on that like had those political subtexts were stopped. Like he was actually like he ran like a local little community theater for impoverished people in Algeria, and like the local government came in and stopped that. And like again, like this Gemini Saturn just really blocking his attempts to share that information with people out in the world. And so actually looking at his chart, his lot of the father falls at 24 degrees of Cancer, which is conjunct Mars. And he essentially did not grow up with his father at all. And also, one thing we didn't talk about, but the 12th part of Saturn is in Gemini, and it's just past this exact 15-degree point where a planet enters the 12th part of the sign opposite to itself. So Saturn's in the 12th part of Gemini, Sagittarius, and lands in later Sag right on his IC. And we can really see how that impacted the absence of his father in his household because of the death of his father.
And it's not just the IC, but it's also the descendant there, which is also like clearly linked to death in a lot of the tradition. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I would definitely say that. And also just like what patterns that set up for him in terms of how he viewed his relationships and like how he didn't feel, like he had a stable father, and like the way that that ended up causing a lot of, problems for him in raising his own children. Again, coming from this root problem that he just endured not
Right.
his father himself.
And his legacy is, which is also like a fourth house thing, is his literary works, right? That Gemini element of what he did.
Mhm. Yeah, and so in December of 1940, he married Francine, which was actually a Sagittarius perfection year as well, which is interesting because that is the seventh house from fortune. Again, nocturnal nativity, that Sag is very powerfully the seventh house, but also this where his lot of love is. So that was really interesting that that happened that year. Um, Other things, a lot of the mother was at 16 Taurus, and so we're looking at aversion, whole sign aversion to the lot from the Lord. And she was deaf. She was also illiterate. And so she didn't play as much of a supportive role in his life immediately, actually, as his grandparents did. And when we look at the lot of grandparents, that lot is actually the distance from 0 Gemini to Saturn. And so there's going to be just the exact degree, minutes, and longitude of Saturn here, 1657. We'll project that from the ascendant downwards because 0 Gemini to Saturn, ascendant down, it lands around 10 Libra, which is where with Libra. I'm sorry, with Venus. So the grandparents played a much more present and personal and powerful role in his life immediately than his mother was able to or did.
Right. And that Venus is ruling the lot of the mother. And like struggled, he was super impoverished throughout his youth, didn't have much money at all. But the grandparents were the ones who really helped take over that and helped financially support them and give them the resources that they needed to
Yeah.
not only live but succeed.
Hmm. Yeah. And then the last two things that I really have is that also one thing I just meant to mention was that the ruler of the lot of children is in a water sign, which is a fertile sign, which is another thing for the children delineation. But his lot of affairs, which is the distance between Venus and Jupiter from the ascendant. So in a night chart, it's Jupiter to Venus. So backwards in order, ascendant, it lands at around 1 Cancer. And that's in a partile square to his retribution. And, everything we were talking about that lot causing sort of a really challenging spiritual crisis in a way and obstacles. Just blocking affairs. So it's
Right.
tight.
And it's co-present with the Lord, the bound Lord of the seventh, bound and Decan Lord of the
Yeah,
seventh cusp.
yeah, that's a great point. Mars is the Almutant of the descendant.
Mhm.
And on top of that, his 12th part, because he's in Cancer Pisces right here, Mars
Yeah.
literally lands right on the descendant. So
Mhm.
Mars actually rules his relationships in a way that's comparable, if not more powerful than Jupiter, especially.
I would definitely argue that Jupiter is working with Saturn here. Jupiter is under Saturn's thumb, but this seventh house there, that's Mars.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, I think those were most of my notes on the lots. Accusation 19 Leo. Yeah, his like Mars Saturn lot, which is just a tragically difficult place, did fall in Leo in the 12th, which is again not a good place. And the ruler's aspecting it from a square. So yeah, you could just delineate there were general challenges and problems relating to maybe even his finances, which was relevant to him. But injuries in Leo too. I'll have to look if he had heart or circulation problems. But I know obviously fortune being here and Saturn is very clear about the lung situation.
Well, if your lungs are not doing well, the rest of your vasculatory system can only do so much.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Alrighty.
that is it for today. That was a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
had to do that one. But thanks everyone for sticking in. If you have any final questions, pop them in now.
yes. Let us know. Also, tweet us at the Mercuranians if you ever have questions or requests or anything. Catch us on Twitter, leave us comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we greatly, greatly appreciate it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. We'll see you all next week with a really exciting episode. And yeah, until then, we'll catch you on the flip side.
Mercuranians out.
All right.